Welcome, everyone, to the Squid and Ultimate Leaf Fan Show. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs fan. Joining me, as always, my winger, Ricky Squid Vaive. Squid, don't look now, but the halfway point of the season is within shooting distance. And the Leafs sit atop of the heap, so to speak. And thoughts so far?
Well, I mean, what 30 games? I think they played pretty darn good. I mean, you look at last night. The game before, they kind of let Chicago back in that game.
Yeah.
It got a little bit sloppy. But last night they got that 5-1 lead, and they played really well defensively, um, especially in the third period. They didn't give Edmonton a whole lot, and I mean that to me that is the most promising thing that I see is the fact that
Mhm.
they're playing better defensively in their own zone. And I mean everybody, the forwards, the D, everybody, they're all kind of getting back and they're all contributing.
No, you're right. I mean, that play between the blue lines is really toughened up, and they've got a lot better at that. So that is breaking up
Yeah.
any sort of sustained rush coming the other way. As we saw in those two of the last three games, it's games you mentioned against Chicago and Columbus, letting them back in the game. They cleaned up that sloppy play. So that was very encouraging to see, especially against a dynamic scoring team like Edmonton.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you hope you continually see that throughout the entire season, heading into the playoffs, because down the stretch when you're fighting for home ice advantage and that sort of thing, that kind of hockey is essential. And then, of course, when you get into the playoffs, we all know that defense wins. And if you're the best defensive team and your goalie is the best goalie, your chances of winning the cup are a lot greater.
They sure are. And they're doing this without the services of Mr. Mitch Marner, number 16. Impressive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, very impressive. I mean, like look at the guy. There's several guys that they brought in over in the off season that have really, really contributed really well. I mean, Bunting, number one, Kasha, Kemp, see Mikheyev's back, and he didn't look all that bad in his first game back. So I'm really optimistic going forward, and hopefully with what's going on now that we don't get the league shut
Yes.
down again, but that's always a possibility, I guess.
Well, as before we get one came on here just now, they half capacity now starting Saturday for Leaf games, and four Vancouver players have tested positive today. Seven Calgary players.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie just sent me a note saying seven Calgary players are tested positive, and a lot of the junior teams. So it's spreading all over the place. So anyway, we'll deal with the cards that are played in front of us. You mentioned Mikheyev coming back last night. As you mentioned, he didn't go unnoticed. He seamlessly fit right back in the lineup, and Keith threw him right into the mix, killing penalties and second power play. Now, as a former player, returning from an injury like that or any kind of injury, how much does that boost your confidence when a coach plays you in all situations like that?
I would have to think it really helps a ton. I mean, if you're and we're not talking about a guy who's one of their top six guys and plays like 20 some odd minutes a game. We're talking about a third or fourth line guy that kills penalties. He's very valuable. Don't get me wrong, but those guys don't get as much ice time. So for him to throw him in there and put him on the second PP unit and right into penalty kill, I think that that mentally for the player means a lot. There's no question about that. Especially he's been out a long time. I mean, he's been out quite a while.
Well, I mean, even as a player, if somebody like yourself come back, you were always one of the top players, so you would be thrown right back into the Wolves. But you must have noticed over the years, somebody maybe a third line guy or guy brought up. You ever see that in your day where the player was put right back in like that, and it would filter through the rest of the team?
Yeah, usually I remember. I mean, I fortunately for me, I never really was injured for that any length of
Yeah.
time. I mean, the most was probably a week or a week and a half max. So I always come right back in and play the same role I had played before I got injured. But I mean, you know what? In my day, you got injured that long, you probably didn't even start with the NHL club. You probably started with the minor league club because most of the guys were on two-way contracts. They could get them down there, and they would put them down there in a conditioning stint for a couple of weeks, and then they'd call them back up. So it's much different now. Although NHL players coming back from injuries do typically sometimes, if it's a long period of time, they'll go down and play 3 or 4 games in the American League. Not your top guys, but your third, fourth line, you know, fourth, fifth, sixth defenseman, goaltenders. They'll go down there and get a little action in before they rejoin the NHL club.
Well, I'm going to be stating the obvious a little bit here, but two trains of thought I have along those lines is the way I take away from that was every spot in this lineup is expected to perform exceptional, whether you've played all 30 games or missed 20. The other thing I look at that is puts everyone alert that the competition to stay in lineup is becoming tougher by the day. We're not going to hide anybody until they're up to speed. Be game ready at all times.
Well, yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, this is probably the best season I've seen for quite some time, where the competition for jobs is unbelievable. I mean, you know, you got, and I'm not talking about your top six, but I'm talking mainly about your bottom six. You got probably 12 guys that could play those spots. Guys playing in the minor leagues, they're coming up and down and that sort of thing. You got Mikheyev coming back, so there's a spot gone. You're going to have Marner coming back at some point. There's another spot that's gone. So, you know, all of a sudden, now there's a battle for the 3 last spots as a forward, and I think they've done a heck of a job, and you know, getting that depth where they've got probably 5, 6 guys that could call up from the Marlies or that are sitting out that could come in the lineup and do just as good a job as anybody else in the bottom 6.
Well, as you met to your point, Marner's earliest return date is December 27th against Columbus. Jason Spezza is going to be back in a couple of games. Nick Ritchie sat out last night. Alex Steves, who didn't look out of place the 2 games he played, was sat in favor of Brett Seney, who actually had a couple good opportunities last night. I mean, it's tough to judge his game after a couple shifts, but Kyle Clifford is pushing hard to stay in the lineup. His experience is shown in the last few starts, making plays and being very responsible defensively. So the whole point is, this only works if you have some depth and the players are actually playing up to the performed levels, which by all counts, it looks like they are right now. And that's up front, that is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, when you've got that much depth, everybody's on their toes. Every day, everybody's on their toes because they're looking over their shoulder. Because if I have a couple of bad games, I could be sitting in the stands and that guy could be up from the Marlies and playing in my spot. So competition for jobs is probably the biggest motivator that athletes in the top leagues can have. If you're in the bottom 6 and you're not motivated because you know there's nobody that can come up and take your job, then mentally you're going to feel that way.
Yes, exactly.
But when you know that there's a bunch of guys that are capable of coming in and doing the same thing you're doing, boy, I'll tell you, that makes you play a little bit harder.
Well, I mean, these are nice problems to have, as we've touched on offensively. My concern is in the back end. They continue, as we've stated many times, to bend but not break. However, there must be some concern with, and I'm not saying they're playing bad, but they are struggling with the play of Muzzin and Hall. I mean, it looks like they're really fighting not only the puck, they're fighting the play somewhat. It almost looks like teams are picking on them to wear them down, and it seems to be working a little bit. The depth isn't that great back there. Sandin is still a couple weeks from returning. Christian Rubens showed some signs of promise, but he struggled and got sent back to the Marlies. If it wasn't for the stellar play of Jack Campbell, those results could have been reversed very easily the last 4 or 5 games. Yeah, but you could say that about a lot of teams at the goaltending, including Tampa with Vasilevsky.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you saw that save that he made on in the shootout last night was unbelievable, where he got that pad across to the far post. I don't know how the heck he did it, but I guess that's why he's a Vezina Trophy winner. I guess, and he's won 2 Stanley Cups in a row, more than likely. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think I wouldn't be one bit surprised if the Leafs pulled off a trade before the deadline and sent a couple of prospects for a good defenseman from somewhere. I don't know who they could get that could fit in under the cap, but it wouldn't shock me one bit if that's what they did before the deadline, because the depth on defense is not great enough going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. Because you're going to have nights where things just aren't going to go your way. And as you said, Hall and Muzzin, they seem to be sluggish out there, and they're both big guys. And maybe you're right. They're saying, okay, throw it in their corners and make them go back and get the puck and wear them out. And it looks like they are worn out sometimes. By the third period, it looks like sometimes, some nights, they can barely move to get back and get the puck.
Well, I mean, these guys are physical guys too, and they're big guys. So they're taking the body, they're giving the body, but they're getting it too. So that does wear on you.
Yeah.
You very well know. You played that way yourself. So do you think now, would you, if you're in their position, would you make a move sooner? I mean, it's a tough thing to always say because we're just sort of playing fantasy here, but would you make a move sooner or later address the concern in the blue line?
Well, I mean, if I was going to make it, I would make it sooner rather than later. I mean, not that long after Christmas, after that freeze ends, I'd be looking to make a deal at that point. I'd be looking around the league for a guy who could step in and play real good defensive hockey for us. And, not necessarily an old guy either, a guy that maybe mid-20s, 27, in that range, 28 even. That has 3 or 4 years left in him, at least, and I wouldn't be shocked if it happened early January, mid-January.
Yep.
I wouldn't be shocked at all. I mean, they know. Well, hey, if we're sitting here talking about it, Mike, you don't think that they're sitting up there and they know that they need another defenseman?
And you and I barely find our way to the front door every morning. So never mind finding our way through players in the league. So that's one thing to be stated right there. But my whole thing was, I mean, if you deal now, it's a bit of a gamble dealing with chemistry and all those type of cliches that go with team and all that kind of stuff. But the downside is the price of poker will only go up closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah.
So to your point, I'd like to see something done sooner.
Yeah, I think early January. I mean, excuse me, you're still a month and a half or more away from the deadline, and you're probably going to be able to get a fourth or fifth defenseman for a lot less than you will a month from then. I mean, the price, as you said, will only go up, and it'll keep going up right up until the deadline, and then any deals that are made on the deadline, everybody's going to overpay. You know that. I mean, We've seen it every single year, and it's no different with free agents in the off season. You sign a guy early, the chances are you probably get him at a better price than you would if you wait and until all the guys are signed, because all of a sudden you got 3 guys that sign real big tickets, and then the price goes up for everybody.
So you've touched on Christmas. So let's touch on that a little bit further. It's the real time when teams get real antsy about their roster, because this is when they're pretty certain of what they have or they don't have. So during your time as a player, I want to speak to you from that experience. Were players a little jumpier around this time, especially your teams maybe, but your teams were usually outside the playoffs, but maybe in the playoffs, close to the playoffs, or just banging on the door? What was the mood like around the room?
Hey. Now, hold on a minute. Now, we made the playoffs, I think, 3 or 4 out of my 7 years I was there. So we weren't that bad.
I just want to keep you on your toes.
No, it depends on the individual. I mean, obviously, everybody always kind of looks at the 20, 25 game mark and say, to see what a team looks like and what they think they're going to portray going forward. In our case, it was usually well after Christmas, like around New Year's, when you're probably have played like 35, 40 games before you start judging where you think you're going to be in come April. And but I mean, it depends on the individual, Mike. Some guys got a little antsy around this time, and the one time I got traded the day after Christmas, and I didn't even think that was coming. I didn't see it coming. All of a sudden, boom, you're out in the pregame skate for a game that night, the day after Christmas, and again, there's a knock on the glass. The assistant coach comes over and says, the coach wants to see you downstairs. And you're going to Buffalo. You're going to Buffalo, and you're supposed to play that night. And there was a snowstorm, so I didn't get out till 7 o'clock that evening. and got to the game before it was finished, but not in time to play, obviously. And the worst part about that was I didn't see my family till February 4th. And I had a 2-year-old, and Joyce was pregnant at the time. And that was the most frustrating thing, I think, out of all of that.
Well, and
Thank God. Thankfully, they brought that freeze in because
yeah.
I mean, I think that was a great idea. In fact, I wouldn't even mind seeing it extended a little bit, like starting, December 20th and going right through until New Year's.
Well, it's because it's the thing where it keeps players unsettled. It's not good for their well-being. And all the old cliches, I can only control what I can control. It's out of my hands. Management will do what they deem right for the team. But what really is going through a player's mind is it has to make them a little bit unsettled, as I just mentioned, but it can affect performances as well.
Well, I think that as you get closer to the deadline, I think that's when those types of things start kind of getting into some players, Mike. And again, it all depends on the individual player. I mean, there's some guys that probably think that there's a good chance they may get dealt, but it doesn't bother them, so they continue to play the same game they play all year long because they just don't let it get inside their head. There's other guys that it really bothers, and you can see it in their play that leading up to the deadline, they're not playing as good as they were before that. And then as soon as the deadline's over, if they don't get moved, then all of a sudden, boom, they're out again. They're flying.
Yeah, it's funny how teams play that first game after the trade deadline. Everybody seems to be relaxed and plays much better. Well, let's face it, players aren't done. They can see the team deep at this team. Let's pick the Leafs. They can see the team is deep at forward and light on D. So they know change is a real possibility, and it isn't going to be a defenseman getting moved.
No, I would think that most of them are pretty much aware that probably two guys, I would think, a prospect and maybe a current player, for both forwards, probably will end up going somewhere for a defenseman. I mean, that's just my guess. I'm not predicting that that's going to happen, right, yeah. But with the lack of depth they have on defense, as far as good defensive defensemen, and with Muzzin struggling a little bit and Hall struggling a little bit, I think the players have to be thinking to themselves, like, we're going to make a move for a defenseman. That means, one of us up here and maybe one of the guys in the Marlies is going to be going the other way, and maybe even more than that. Who knows? Depending on what they get back as a defenseman in return.
Well, the wild card in all this, in my view, is how Peter Mrazek plays in goal. We know Campbell is in a good spot right now, but he can't play them all. And with things so tight in this division, you can't take a night off, as we all know, again, to use another old cliche. And if Mrazek can't do the job while staying healthy at the same time, it's a big ask of a very inexperienced Joseph Woll. This narrative obviously takes a dramatic turn with a Campbell injury of any kind, obviously.
Yeah, no question. I mean, wow. I mean, if that happens, then we're in real trouble because, and I don't think you could really fault Mrazek on the goals that he allowed in the third period the other night against Chicago. They played very sloppy in front of him. There's no question about that. I think he's capable of, playing 25 games or roughly if he stays healthy, and that will give Campbell a little bit of rest. But boy, oh boy, I don't even want to think about the fact if Campbell gets hurt, because I don't know where the heck we're going to go from there. May have to deal for a goalie too then.
Well, what do you think of the play? Another one here. What do you think of the play? Guy we haven't touched on for a couple of weeks is Morgan Rielly. What do you think of the play of him the last little while? 22 assists, I think he has now.
Yeah, no, he's been piling up the points for quite a while now, and playing some good hockey, moving the puck. He's moving his feet. I always watch players and I go, okay, but I watch Rielly now. Earlier in the year, he was getting a pass from his partner or whatever, and then he would just be looking around to move the puck. But now I see as soon as he gets it, he starts moving his feet, which means it gives him a lot more options. He can either skate it in or skate to the red line and dump it in or make a pass across. I mean, he's got three different options when he's moving his feet. But when he's standing still, looking around, then there's only one option, and that's to move the puck.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really helped him. The fact that at least that's what I see anyway, is that he's moving his feet real quick after he gets the puck, so that he's moving, and it gives him more options going up the ice.
Well, and the guy playing with him doesn't get enough credit for how good he has played in TJ Brody. And you can see the reaction of the players last night when he scored. The whole bench was on their feet. They got the puck. That's just a telling sign of what the players, the respect they have for him as a player and what he does.
No, there's no question. I mean, he was like that in Calgary, though. He doesn't do anything amazing, anything that you go, wow, like that was a hell of a play he made or whatever. He's just steady, and plays very good in his own zone, blocks shots. I mean, he does it all. It's just, I mean, he's not going to get you a bunch of goals or a ton of points.
No.
But that doesn't matter. He's a defenseman that's his job is playing defense, and he does it very, very well. And you're right. You could tell when he scored a goal from his teammates that they appreciate what he does, because they were so excited for him that they were more excited than he was.
He was. He just turned around and skated back to the blue line, and everybody was jumping up and down. I mean, I thought that was a real tell sign. So that's great to see. Well, Squid, it's that time again. Your favorite time of the show, quote of the week. But this week, this week I'm going to throw you for a little bit of a curveball here. And actually, the curveball goes right along with the mood we're going to lighten a little bit with the Yogi Bearism. So using a baseball analogy here, that does have a slight hidden meaning for upcoming road games in Vancouver, hopefully, and Seattle for the Leafs. So are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be careful if you don't know where you are going, because you might not get there.
Well, I think they know where they're going, but
no, you're going.
They're going into a place. They're going into a building, playing a team that has won 5 in a row.
Exactly
under
right.
The new coach. And you're right. You got to be very, very wary of that. But then again, at the same time, you're going in there going, okay, they made a GM and a coaching change, and they won 5 in a row. They're bound to lose one sooner or later, and it may as well be us.
Exactly right.
That would be the way. That's the way I would be looking at it. Is okay, great. They've won 5 in a row since they switched coaches. That's perfect, because they're going to lose one eventually. It may as well be us.
Exactly right.
Why not?
And don't forget Seattle too is another one, because Seattle is going to be all up with the Leafs coming in. All that's again, I kind of thought that was all fitting, just going in line with what we had there. So, well, anyway, that's all for today. Next week, same time, same place. Don't forget to tune into this week's Squid and Ultimate Leaf Fan podcast. Drops Friday at 6 p.m.
And before we leave, I just wanted to mention too that 34 is playing pretty darn good lately too.
Oh God,
he's up to 20. He's up to 20 goals now. He's got 52 games to score 35.
Yep. Well, and the bonus is, if we'll tell him, we'll send him a message that he gets to come on our show again.
But, yeah, okay. Well, he'll get a double. He'll get a double episode if
he gets a double episode. If he gets to the 55, we'll bring it back. Because remember the last time it got cut off, and he does want to come on. So if we want to jinx him, so we don't want to say that. But when he becomes a member of the club, which he's headed that way, we'll have him back on, and we'll do a double episode. So, folks, there's what you have to look forward to coming up. Now, anyway. Yeah. Now, before you interrupt me, at least let me finish next time, Squid, before I get this. I said, no, so let me start all over again. That's all for today. Next week, same time, same place. Don't forget to tune in to this week's Squid and Ultimate Leaf Fan podcast. Drops Fridays at 6 p.m., featuring longtime Hockey Night in Canada executive producer John Shannon. He's full of stories, boy, and I'll tell you, he was probably a tough guy to work for. Well, you work for him, so you know he's a tough guy, and he pulls no punches, and no matter who you are, whether you're the guy as a runner or you're the guy who scored 50 goals 3 times in a row, he will still beat on you. You're living proof.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? That's why he was so successful, because
yes, exactly.
he made people accountable and for how they worked, and I don't have a problem with that. I've lived that my whole life.
Yes.
And I think that's the way, if you're a boss, that's the way that you need to be. You need to obviously have good communication skills, but you got to make everybody accountable.
And this guy did, and he made himself accountable. He put extreme pressure on himself.
Yeah.
He came up with great, innovative ideas for Hockey Night in Canada. Him and the likes of Ralph Mallenby have given us the product that we have, and he was always on his toes. It's a very interesting interview. It's a little different than normal hockey guys, but it's a good insight for hockey fans who followed Hockey Night in Canada for most of their lives, so which we all have. So tune in and listen to that. I don't think you're too disappointed. So anyway, folks, we want to thank you again for listening. Hope to at least pick up a couple win sports on the rest of this road trip. I'll talk to you guys next week.